computer and share screen. Share. Okay. All right. So as I said, this webinar is going to be on locations and control of holdings. So to start off with, what is control of holdings? Control of holdings are the steps taken by your institution to ensure that your collections are properly managed so they can be located for use by staff, volunteers, and visitors. So it's basically, can you find your holdings in your collections? This encompasses many areas, including policies and practices, the intellectual control of your records, the physical control of your records, as well as a plan for the records that your institution creates as well. So I'm going to touch on all these areas in the next hour. Obviously, I can't talk about the whole breadth and depth of control holdings in 1 hour. So if at any point somebody has any questions or later about control holdings and how they can work towards getting a better control, please contact me and we can go over it. Also, I will be sharing this PowerPoint after as well, and I'm also getting the last month's webinar as well as this one translated into French for anybody who would like a French version as well. So good control of holdings creates confidence about your institution with the public because you're able to properly store, locate, and return records to their correct location. And it also helps show that your institution is professional because, you know, if you're able to find your records, people will want to donate things to you because you have proper control and understanding of them. So we're going to go through all these various areas. Okay, so policies and practices. They really form the backbone of locations and control holdings at your institution, and really policies and practices form the backbone of everything that your institution does. They are created to guide and instruct current and future staff, as well as volunteers, and how certain things are done at your institution. They also provide general guidance and aspirations as well. Policies tend to be created by your institution's governing body, and as I said, are meant to serve as a guide to your institution on a particular topic. They tend to be somewhat, vague is not the correct word, but they're not always very specific to a task or to an item. They tend to be a little bit more generalized. And since policies are created by the governing body, they can only be updated or changed by the governing body, which can be a bit of a process, as some on this call may know. Practices or procedures, as some may know, on the other hand, are generally created by the staff or volunteers at an institution, and they lay out how certain tasks are done at the institution. And since practices or procedures are created by those who carry out the daily tasks, they're updated and revised by the staff and volunteers as needed. So where policies tend to be general and broad, practices or procedure documents tend to be very specific. For example, this is how we accession a new acquisition. This is how we retrieve records, that kind of stuff, that actual workflow of that. They also provide really great resources for new staff and volunteers for training and questions. So if you have new summer students, new staff, new volunteers, and you want to get them oriented to your institution, these documents can provide a really great resource where they can sit down, read these documents, and get an understanding of kind of how things run. And also, if they ever have any questions, they can refer back to those documents as well, as well as asking their supervisor. Another really great reason to have practices particularly written down is it helps prevent people from implementing their own systems when they think they may have a new idea of how to do things, or people start deviating from the current system. If you have it written down in a document that staff and volunteers can easily find, they can easily reference it, and know that's how things are done. It also works too if somebody thinks that, oh, we could do things this way. They're not just going to reinvent the wheel, and they start doing things how they want to do, and somebody else starts doing things how they want to do. Practices should be updated frequently and routinely as needed, especially with changes in technology over time. During these review processes is a really excellent time for those who have new ideas on how to update practices, can discuss them with colleagues, staff, and other volunteers to come up with ways to either streamline or enhance what your institution is already doing. Sometimes, especially for practice documents, it's easier to write after you figure out the workflow than it is to write it before. I apologize also if you hear some scuffling in the background. That's just my cat playing with this toy. So intellectual control is kind of the first thing we need to have in order to gain physical control. So I know this webinar is on locations and control of holdings and not on the actual description and accessioning of records. We did accessioning last month, but we still need to touch on intellectual control as well. So the intellectual control of your records means that you know what the content of your fallen collections is, you know the history of the records, you know who donated them, that kind of information about the records. And without intellectual control, it makes having physical control really difficult, because if you don't have intellectual control of your holdings, you can't have physical control, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you can't go find it. So if you don't know what's in the records, you then can't go find that information for somebody who is looking for those records. And this relies really on the good accessioning and good archival description of records. This means you need to accession and describe records as soon as you're able to. This way, records do not become disassociated from each other. So if you have records that are in multiple boxes, the boxes eventually don't get separated from each other, and the records themselves don't get separated from their original paperwork, whether that be transfer forms, accession, deed of gifts, purchase, bequeaths, what have you. So as I said, intellectual control really relies on good archival description and accessioning. So on to physical control, which is what we're really all here for. Physical control means that you know where your records are, and you are able to go and get those records for someone when they want to look at them. And as I said, physical control works in tandem with intellectual control, because if you don't know what you have, you can't then go find it. And there's kind of two stages or steps to physical control. There's the preliminary stage, and that is when records enter your institution up until the time they are processed. And then there's the permanent stage, which is what happens to the control of those records once they are fully described. So the preliminary stage, as I said, this is how records are physically managed upon the time they arrive at your institution to the time they are processed. Many institutions choose to keep recently acquired and unprocessed records separate from their permanent storage areas. The reason for this is that way you can visually see what needs to be worked on and what has already been processed. Also, unprocessed records tend to take up more space than processed records, just because unprocessed records may not be stored in the most space efficient way possible upon receipt. For example, if a donor has packed a box, they might have just thrown the records in, and they might not be really neatly arranged in the way that takes up the least amount of space. Or if you have acquired a large donation, you may need to go through and choose what needs to be kept and what doesn't need to be kept. And through that process, you reduce the number of records that you have. Also, there is the chance that newly acquired records have pests in them. So by keeping new acquisitions and already processed records separate, you are then able to have a little bit of control over pest management. We don't want to think that records are going to come in containing pests, but there is always that chance. And it's never fun when there is infestation that breaks out among your records. Newly received records should be accessioned, as I said, as soon as possible to gain basic intellectual and physical control over the records. As I touched on briefly in our last webinar, you should not accession records until you have legal ownership of those records, whether that is via a signed deed of gift, purchase agreement, or a signed transfer form. But we want to get the records accessioned as soon as possible because then we know how much of the records there are, we know what's in the records, and we know kind of what types of materials to expect in those records as well. Also, by doing this, we know if there's any oversized records or if any records need to go to conservation or whatnot. Because if you have oversized records in a donation, then you might need to look at, do we need a special box built for something? Do we need to put something in a map cabinet? And you can start planning for that as well. The basic physical control, as I said, we're looking for what the extent of the fauna is, fauna collection, and how many boxes that fauna collection is currently taking up. So your steps to gain physical control really are accession records as soon as you can. We then want to write the accession number as soon as possible on the outside of the box or boxes. I have an example of what this looks like in the next slide. And then if there are multiple boxes in a fauna or collection, one way to keep track of the boxes is to write the total number of boxes that are in the fauna on the outside of the box. So for example, if there are 5 boxes in a fauna, the first box on it would have 1 out of 5, the second box would have 2 out of 5, third box would have 3 out of 5, so on and so forth. That way, if somebody is going to look for this fauna to process it, they can say, oh, I got box 1 and I need 4 more boxes, or I have 3 boxes, we're missing a box. That way people know how much they're looking for and how much volume of records there are. Also for planning and processing, you might think a fauna based on the accession record is going to take you a day to process, where in reality you go look and there's actually 10 boxes and that's going to take you significantly longer. As well, we want to keep unprocessed material in a designated separate area until it is processed, which I've already gone over. So this is a picture of an example box of records that they've just been accessioned. This is a box from the Provincial Archives of New Brunswick. So as I was saying, the accession number is the top number there written on the outside of the box, so we can connect the records in the box back to its paperwork. And the second number on the box indicates that that is the 4th box out of 4. So there is another 3 boxes that go with this font or collection. Anything that you write on the outside of the box before the records are processed should be done in pencil. This way you can erase any information. Also too, when you're processing the records and you cut the collection down from 4 boxes to 3 boxes, you can reuse that extra box because you can just erase all the information off the box as well, because it's not written on there in pen or marker. Okay, so that's briefly about physical control at the kind of preliminary stage when records come into your institution. Obviously, this process is going to look different for everybody. Somebody who has a large archive is going to do things different than somebody who has a small archive. So everything I say, don't take it as truth, as set in stone. Things are going to look different from institution to institution, and that's okay. So the kind of next step of physical control is the permanent stage. So what is happening to your records once they are processed? They are permanently part of your collection. And there are kind of 3 main areas to the permanent stage. That is your shelf numbering system, your housing for your various records of various sizes, and the tracking of records. So I'm going to go through each of those 3 things individually. So when we're devising some kind of shelf numbering system or identifying system, we need to know where all of the permanently permanent records, permanently processed records are kept. Are they all kept in one room? Are they kept in 2 rooms? Are they kept in 3 rooms? Because that is going to dictate how we come up with a system. And you should use the same system across all your storage areas, just to keep things easy for staff, volunteers, and whatnot. And a kind of very simple way to create a shelf numbering system is we need to identify all the areas where records are kept. We need to identify the types of storage in each of those areas. For example, is there a mixture of shelves, file cabinets, map cabinets, that kind of stuff. Then we need to develop some form of system that is going to work for your institution. I'm going to give an example of one system, but that system might not work for everybody, and that's okay. Every system is different. And then we need to document how the system actually works. Because once we have everything nicely labeled, we then want to document how we number new shelves and whatnot to make sure the system continues on. So just a quick example of a shelf numbering system. So we're going to pretend that the table on this slide is actually big bays of shelves, just because I wasn't able to get a good photograph of shelves with numbers on them. So this table is our stand-in shelf. So at the top of each of our shelves, there is a letter A, B, C. If we had more than 3 bays of shelves, we would just kind of keep going with the alphabet. Each of the shelves going down the shelf is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you see that each bay of shelves is 1 through 5, 1 through 5, 1 through 5. Now the numbers, you can have 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom. It does not matter as long as you are consistent across how you number your shelves. A really easy way to label your shelves is just to go either buy a label maker or go buy a bunch of adhesive labels and write the number out on an adhesive label and stick it to a shelf. To have the letters above the shelf, you could just print them out really big on a piece of printer paper and stick them up. And the reason that each shelf, so as we see going down each shelf, it goes 1 through 5. The reason that I don't have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 is because the bay letter combined with the shelf number creates its own unique shelf number. So there will only be one A2. There will only be one C5, as an example. Now, this gets more complicated if you have multiple rooms. This is a very simple way to number your shelves if you have one storage room. Now, what happens if we have multiple storage rooms? A really easy way to get around this is to create some kind of unique identifier for each storage room. One way you could do it is by what your institution calls that room. So for example, at the provincial archives, where they store the records, it's called the repository. All the staff call it the repository. Maybe at your institution, you call it, one area is the repository, one area is called the annex, where you keep records. Pick whatever descriptor that your staff and volunteers already use. That way they know, okay, we're going to go to the vault. I know exactly what room this code is referencing. So in addition to your shelf numbers, A1, A2, what have you, you can have them prefaced with the descriptor for that room. So vault A2, annex C5, or something like that as part of your shelf number. So that way staff will know where to go and find that, that box that they're looking for, or those records. Obviously, these systems can be significantly more complicated than this. They can also be as simple as you like. So you really need to pick what is going to work best for you, for your staff, and for your volunteers. And one thing to do as well, if you have multiple rooms, is always start the numbering on the same side of the room. So if you have 2 storage rooms, maybe you always have A is on the right-hand side of the room. That way, staff, volunteers who are going to go get the records, they know that, okay, I'm looking for shelf E. A is always going to be on the right, so I'll go around the room looking for E. It's just little ways like that to make things easier for your staff and volunteers than making it more complicated than possibly necessary. Also, once we have a shelf numbering system, so we've figured out a way to number or label all of our shelves, the next thing we need to figure out is we need a box numbering system. So the box number compared with the shelf number is going to give you a very unique way to find the records that are in that box. Each box of processed archival material needs its own unique number that is to be written on the outside of the box in preferably Sharpie, along with the font or collection number. As I said, the box number compared with the shelf number, along with the font/collection number, allows staff to locate records. This can either be done. This can be done in many, many ways, and it looks really different. One way to label your boxes, if you're a large institution, you may have some type of electronic tracking system. If you're smaller, you may start your box numbers at 001, the next box is 002, the third box is 003, so on and so forth, just to keep it really easy and straightforward. So if we have a system where the shelves are numbered, the boxes are numbered, and each box has a font and collection number written on it, then we need to figure out how in the world are we going to track those boxes. Now, you may have a database that is able to input locations. So when you search for a font or collection, it'll come up. If you don't have that kind of database already, that's okay. There's really 2 options. The first option is we can use the Provincial Archival Database Archive CANB, which all members of the Council of Archives New Brunswick have access to, or you can use a box list. So before we get into box lists, I'm going to really briefly show you how Archive CANB can be used to track locations. Maybe. So what we're looking at right now, this is Archive CANB, which is the provincial archival database. I'm just going to go through this really quick. Anybody who would like to have a more deeper tutorial on either the database or how to input locations into it, you can please contact me and we can set up a meeting to do that.
We don't see the website, we still see the PowerPoint.
Oh, thank you. Hold on, sorry guys. That's not what I want. That's not what I want, come on. Nope.
Sometimes you need to stop sharing your screen so it kind of resets.
Okay. Thanks, Christine. Stop share. Oops, share. Oh, can we see it now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, okay. Sorry about that. I'm clearly still new to the whole webinar thing. Okay, so here is now the provincial archival database, archive CANB. It says logged in up at the top, but this looks no different than if I am logged in or if you are logged in. So I'm just going to pick a font at random. So this is the Milton Gregg font at the Provincial Archives. I just use this one as an example all the time. So as we are logged in, we get all these kind of buttons down here at the bottom. Under the More button, we can link physical storage. And anybody, as I said, who is a member of the Council of Archives New Brunswick has access to this database and has access to this function. Now, I have it set up that only people who are logged in can see the location. So people out in the general public and on the World Wide Web will not be able to see the location of any of your boxes or font. Only someone who's logged in will be able to see it. So we are under link physical storage. What we want to do is we want to create a new container. So the name could be box 035. The location could be Alt 2A as an example. Now there are many different types of options for boxes or types of storage that are in here. So we can have it selected that it is in a folder, it's in a file cabinet, it's in a map cabinet, or it's on a shelf. So as we have named this as a box, we're just going to leave it as box, and we're going to save. And now, down here at the bottom of our screen, we see that it has the location, which is, I'm just going to move the screen slightly because I can't see it. It now says box 35, vault 2A. So we now have a way to track our locations and whatnot. I am going to just go in and delete that because that is not where that box actually is. Now, if you have a font or collection that spans multiple boxes, you can have multiple boxes listed as well. You can also have boxes listed at each different level of description. So you could have all your boxes listed at the font level, or if you have multiple boxes with multiple series across these boxes, you can have the box linked at the series level as well. Now, as I said, this is just a really kind of quick way to show you that the database can do it. For anybody who would like a deeper tutorial on how to use the locations or the database in general, please contact me and we can set that meeting up. Also, if enough people kind of want a tutorial, we could set up a webinar just on the database as well. So that was just kind of a quick way to show you that the database can do that. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint. Excellent. So obviously we can use a database to track our locations, or we can use something called a box list or an inventory list. These things have various names. And they also have various shapes and sizes depending on what's going to work for your institution, as well as the size of the font or collection that we are describing. So say we have a single box of records, we could have somewhere in the finding aid, maybe at the top or at the end, saying font is in box 35. So that way when somebody is looking at the finding aid, they can go through at the end and say, okay, it's in box 35, I can go find it. You could have a whole master list of all your box numbers, their locations, and what is in that box. You could have that at the end of your finding aid. You could have that embedded in your finding aid. Maybe you have a very complex arrangement, and maybe you want to have at each level of description, you know, this series is in boxes 40 and 41 or something like that, as well as their location. This, as I said, is going to look very, very different for everybody on this webinar, because what is going to work, as an example, for Christine at the University of Moncton is not going to work at Peninsula Heritage. But that's okay. Every system is different because each institution is different. As well, when we're doing a box list or an inventory list, we also kind of want to think about security. Not that we want to think that people are going to break in and steal our records, but there's always that one person who is going to want to, who maybe knows what things are worth or whatnot. So maybe you want to have a separate box list from the finding aid just for security reasons, for when you give somebody the finding aid to look at, they're not seeing the location and box number, so they can then break in and look at it. We really hope that doesn't happen, but there's always that one person who does terrible things like that. Obviously, boxes and locations and whatnot can be very complicated. This is a very brief kind of skim over of how this would all work. Anybody who wants to get kind of deeper into how to create these types of systems, please contact me, as I said, and we can figure out a meeting and ways that are going to work for you. Another part of kind of the permanent stage of your physical control is rehousing records. When you're processing records, you may discover that the box they're currently in is not the best box. Maybe you have a very small amount of records in a very large box. That box is taking up too much room, so maybe you want to put the records into a smaller box. Maybe you have oversized records that are being stuffed into a too small of box. Then we might want to look into getting a custom oversized box done, or placing those records in a map cabinet, what have you. Also, if you're transferring records from an old box to a new box, we obviously want to transcribe whatever is written on the outside of the box to the new box. As well as when we rehouse records, the number of boxes may increase or decrease. It really depends. So I briefly said that we could get custom boxes made for oversized records. Dean Lunn, the conservator at the Provincial Archives, he creates custom boxes for records. You would just need to contact him and he can set you up with a price when it can be done and all that. I can provide you with his contact information if you would like. As well, we may choose to write things in pencil or pen on the outside of the box. We could also create labels to stick on outside of boxes. It really depends on what's going to work best for you. This part may be a little different to some people, but that's okay. So fall-in collections don't always need to be stored together. This is more so, especially if you have oversized records. So for an example, maybe you have received a font that has correspondence and photos that fit really nicely into your standard archival box, but then you get a really large oversized ledger that is not going to fit into that box. Or maybe also within that donation, there is also a series of large maps that are not going to fit into a box whatsoever. So our oversized ledgers, books, bound materials, and any oversized maps, plans, architectural drawings ideally need to be either stored in their own special box or a map cabinet. Now, you might be tempted to have maps rolled up and stuck on top of the boxes on a shelf because that map belongs with that font. Or same with ledgers, you may choose to have, since this oversized ledger goes with this font, we're going to sit the book or whatever on top of the boxes. This is not ideal because that record is not being stored in the most appropriate way. So for ledgers, we want them to either be stored on their side. So if we have box, 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 ledger stored on its side, all of a sudden we're using more space than necessary because we can't put anything on top of that ledger. If we have ledgers in their own special custom box, we can stand them up on their edge. So all of a sudden it goes box, box, ledger, box, box, box. So we're taking up less space. To go back to my map example, a big map on top of a shelf, it ideally should be laid flat because they're very difficult to uncurl at times, and constantly unrolling and rolling them can cause a lot of damage to records. Most damaged records occurs when we're handling them because that's the time they're getting used and touched and whatnot. So as I said, we might be tempted to store that map on top of the boxes, but what happens when we start retrieving records, if we start taking a bunch of boxes off a shelf that has a map on top of it, that map could be then stored sideways, and that's not good for it. Somebody might say, this map's in my way, move it to another shelf, and then it never gets moved back to its original shelf. And all of a sudden we have now technically lost that map or ledger, what have you. So ideally, we want to store records how they should be stored anyway. Now, if any of you go looking for the price of map cabinets online, they are very, very expensive. For good reason, they are large cabinets. You can use second-hand map cabinets as long as they're not rusted. So if you know an architectural firm that's going out of business or an engineering firm that's getting rid of their map cabinets because they've all gone digital, they're generally looking to get rid of them and will sell them to you or give them to you for free for next to nothing. So that's always an option, is to keep your eye out to get map cabinets that way. Now, I've just said that we can store font and collections apart from each other. The way to do this is you need a really, really good shelf numbering system. You need a really good locations tracking system as well. Because if we don't have good shelf numbering and we don't have a good locations tracking system, then storing records apart from each other is not going to work very well. Also, if you are receiving records from an organization that is currently operating, for example, maybe you get records every year from the local Boy Scout troop, and the Boy Scouts happen to be stored on shelf A, and every year they bring you 5 boxes of records. You end up keeping 4 boxes. Every year you're going to have to shuffle your boxes. And if you're starting at shelf A, could be a lot of shelves that you now need to shuffle. So if every year when the Boy Scouts come to see you, their records just get added to the end of the shelf, it makes less headache for you. And as long as you have really good location tracking and stuff, then you can always bring those records back together. As I said, that could take different forms and whatnot, and how one institution is going to do that versus another, as I said, is different, which is really, I think, the theme of this webinar, is not everything is going to work for everybody. So we could work out how that would look as well. No, there we go. So I'm going to really briefly touch on retrieval as well. So obviously we have records. We want people to look at them. We now have a fancy shelf numbering system. We have a box system. We have a tracking system, which now means we can go get records for researchers to let them look at them, and then also return records. So the whole point of this whole shelf numbering control holdings is that when you go get the box records, you can find it and you can put it back after someone is done with it back to its correct spot. I'm also going to touch kind of a little bit about actually giving researchers records as well, because that's also part of your control holdings. To ensure the safety of records, it's advised that you do not give researchers a whole box of records or multiple boxes of records at one time. As I said, there is always one person who ruins everything for everybody else, and there's always going to be that person who slips a record into their bag, into their pocket. We like to think it doesn't happen, but unfortunately it happens. So an easy way to do is to give researchers a folder at a time, maybe a couple folders at a time. So a good system that I've seen in place that I quite like to ensure that a folder is returned back to its proper box is if we have a folder of records, we take out a folder, we put something in the box where that folder is supposed to go. It could be a piece of printer paper, it could be a different colored folder, it could be a bookmark, something that's going to hold the place of that folder in that box. Now, I know you've heard me say and previous archives advisors say, don't use colored folders to store your records, but for the hour that somebody is going to have that folder out, maybe you can put a color folder in amongst all the other folders. It's not going to be the end of the world. If you have multiple researchers in, as an example, and you're handing out folders left and right, and then all of a sudden they come back at once and you're like, oh no, I don't know what box any of these go in because I have 10 boxes out right now. One thing you can do is you can write the box number right on the folder in pencil. So that way when people start returning folders to you, you can just really quickly go through and say, oh, this is box 35, this is box 2, this is box what have you. It's a very simple system. It works really, really well. Maybe other people have other systems that they use, and that's totally okay as well. Also, too, when researchers look at records, when they're done, we want to put the records back on the shelf where they belong as soon as possible. This is just kind of good housekeeping. When someone's done looking at something, you want to go put it back. That way, it doesn't end up always living in the research room. This also goes for staff as well. If they have their own office, as some of you may know, once a box of records enters somebody's office, it may permanently live in that person's office now. Records do get lost this way. So we do want to know, okay, when we're done with the box, we go and we put it back. And then lastly, I want to very, very briefly touch on institutional records. So also included in your locations and control holdings is managing the records that your institution creates itself. So I'm not talking about the records that come into your institution. I'm talking about the records that staff and volunteers create on a day-to-day basis while working or volunteering at your institution. This could be correspondence. It's kind of generally broke down into governance records, administrative records, and operational records. So this is things like your annual general meeting minutes, board meeting minutes, financial records, HR records, inquiry logs. If you do exhibitions, it could be exhibition records, grants applications, publications, programming records, all sorts of different things. Because ideally, we want to be able to find, if we're an archive and we can find the records that people bring to us, we also want to be able to find the records that we ourselves have created. And how we do this is through a file plan and records retention and destruction schedule, which are large, scary documents that can be hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, I'm very briefly touching on this. If anybody wants to delve into organizing their institutional records, last year, CANB hired somebody to create a sample file plan and records retention and destruction schedule that I can give you, and we can work through it together on how to actually organize your institutional records. This goes for both physical and digital records as well. It is a bit of a process. I'm not going to lie. It's depending on the size of the institution. It might be a day, it might be weeks, it could be months to actually get it organized. But once it's organized, you have a filing system. You can find everything that you're looking for. And you know exactly when some things get destroyed and when some things get kept. It's always good to put in this kind of system before an anniversary, because if it's the 50th anniversary of your museum or archive, somebody guaranteed is going to want to do an exhibit about things we've done in the past. And if your institutional records aren't organized, trying to get them organized, sorted, and then usable for an exhibition on your anniversary year is a lot to do at once. So, as I said, I'm just kind of briefly touching on that. There is a whole webinar in managing institutional records up in itself that I do not have time to get into at this moment. But as I said, if anybody would like to discuss it, we certainly can. So, whoops. See. Stop sharing. Okay. Cool. So that's all I had to say. As I said, unfortunately, this was kind of a very brief, very quick, large overview of how locations and control of holdings worked. As most of you have probably seen, this can be very complicated, and each institution has a different situation. So anybody who wants to work on their locations and control holdings, we can work together to work on that. I can also try to answer any questions, comments that anybody has now as well. So if anybody has any questions or whatnot, you can either unmute yourself and ask, or since I've stopped the screen sharing, I can now see the chat box. So if you just want to type something in, we can do that as well.
Kelly, do you have the contact for the person for doing custom boxes handy? Or is that something you would mail out?
Can't hear you.
I can give it right now. I don't have Dean's phone number off the top, but the best way to get him is with his email. So his email is dean.lund, L-U-N-D, @gnb.ca, and I will type it in.
Dean Lund at GNB.
I will say he does, I used to work for Dean as a student and as kind of my first job after school. And it is easiest for him if you bring him a lot of books at once, because he can kind of do a bunch of boxes all at one time. So if you have like 4 or 5 books that need to be done, it would be easiest to get them all done at once. The pricing, I can't remember what the exact price of a custom box is anymore. It's been a while, but it's generally for CANB members, it's generally just the cost of the materials. So he's not charging for labor or time. It's just the raw materials to make the box. They are generally quite cheap compared if you were going to go to Carr McLean or somebody else to get a custom box.
And is he based in Fredericton?
Yes. So if you're looking to bring records up, either it kind of works one of 2 ways. If you're coming to Fredericton, you can arrange a drop-off time with him, or staff, even though it's currently a pandemic, staff at the archives are still picking up records. So if I know that you have books from down in Kingston, I can ask around asking if people are going to St. John or the Kingston area already to get records, and they could stop by and get those books as well.
Okay, thank you.
And that goes throughout the province as well. If I know someone's looking for records, then I'll go to them and say, I'm going to St. John on Tuesday. Is there anything in St. John that needs to be picked up? Just because it saves gas and time. So
right, great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I have one question that besides color folders to mark what researchers have used in a box, what else could be used? You could use just a sheet of regular printer paper. Now, printer paper is generally not archival, but due to international standards, printer paper has to look, I don't have a piece of blank printer paper, I apologize, but has to look like it came off the production line for 100 years. So you could use a piece of printer paper in the box. I've also seen people who, if they have old file folders, they'll cut big strips of file folders to kind of put it in almost as a bookmark. I've seen that. I've also seen if you're giving people a large volume of records out of a box, we all know if we take a number of file folders out of a box, the rest of the records in there will start to slump. So I have seen people who will put like a space holder in, essentially. That could be like a book. I've seen bricks covered in bookbinder's cloth. I've seen people who make kind of little triangles of various sizes to put in the box. It can take all different shapes and sizes as well. So also too, if you're kind of looking for space, triangles or squares to take up space, Dean at the Provincial Archives might be able to furnish you with some. There's always like scraps and offcasts from the box making process that we can't use to make anything else. And it's nothing to kind of turn them into a triangle or to a rectangle that could be used as a box filler as well. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have any more questions. Obviously, if you have any questions later today or next week or anything like that, you can send me an email, you can call me, and we can discuss it further. We can also set up a Zoom meeting if we want to talk face-to-face and whatnot as well. The next CANB webinar is going to be September 16th, and that is going to be on disaster planning or emergency planning, as some of you may know. That's going to be very brief. It's only going to be an hour. Obviously, disaster planning is a large, complex process, and I won't be able to touch on every aspect in an hour. Luckily, though, this fall, I'm doing a disaster planning course through Athabasca University. So come January, if anybody wants help writing their own disaster plan, I will be fully qualified to help you do that. So that's very exciting. So I did enough, I know enough about disaster planning to give an hour presentation on it, but this course is going to be able to let me help you write your own disaster plan, which is very exciting. Hopefully we never have to use it, but it's still very exciting. Also, as well, as many of you probably saw my email, the Canadian Conservation Institute has selected us to hold a digital preservation workshop. So due to the immense popularity of this workshop, there's going to be a second set of dates. So there's going to be, the first workshop is going to be October 22nd to 24th, and the second set of dates is the 20th to the 22nd. Unfortunately, this workshop is already full for both dates. The interest has greatly exceeded what I thought it would be, which is fantastic. And as New Brunswick is a bilingual province, I've talked to the Canadian Conservation Institute, and anybody who would like to take the workshop in French, that opportunity is going to be the October dates. So what the Canadian Conservation Institute has proposed is if the majority of people in the October session wish to take the workshop in French, the workshop will be offered entirely in French. But if the majority of people in the October session wish to take it in English, it will be offered in English. All materials will be translated in time for the October workshop. CCI encourages people to ask questions in French. Any questions asked in French will be answered in French. All of your assignments and whatnot can be done in that as well. They will also be doing segments of the October session in French as well for those participants. I did ask them if we could have a set of dates for a third set of dates for a solely French offering, but they said we would actually have to apply next year to have it as its own separate workshop, and this was the solution that they presented to me at the time. So if anybody's interested, who is signed up and is interested in doing it in French, please let me know and I'll sign you up for the October dates. After September 16th, there's no more CANB webinars planned. If you would like to see more of these webinars, please email me your ideas or suggestions, and we can get them set up as well. So if there is nothing else, as I said, this has been recorded, so if people want to watch the recording later, we are working on a way to get the recordings out to you and edited slightly as well.
Oh, so we get this done.
So, if there's no other questions,
Kelly, just the
Thank you.
about the digital records workshops, they're both full.
yes.
How do they happen? Are they online? Are they in live or?
Well, it was supposed to be in person in May, but that quickly got scrapped for
Right.
health reasons.
Mhm.
The original plan was they were just going to postpone them until we could hold them in person, but that, who knows when that would be. So the Canadian Conservation Institute has offered us to do them digitally.
Okay.
So how the format is, so I said it's 3 days each. It's not 3 days of a talking head on a screen. Each
Right.
day will be a 2-hour session in the morning live, and then you'll have a piece of homework to do for the next session. So it's not 3 solid days of this. It's only 6 hours essentially of this over 3 days plus an assignment. So.
And so given that they're both full already, I'm not sure I missed that one. Is there any way to access the information that's being presented other than being at the workshop? Given that it's digital anyway, are they going to record those 2 hours and make them available?
I can ask that. I have a meeting with them, I think it's next week. Also, I can send out all the information as well after the sessions because they provide all the PowerPoints, worksheets, assignments, and supplementary material as well. So I can, after the first workshop, I can send out that information to people.
And when is the first one again? October 22nd is the first one?
That's the second one. The first one is, that's not my calendar, the first one is September 22nd to 24th, and the second one is October 20th to 22nd.
So we would be able to get some of that information from you potentially at the end of September.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
It filled up much quicker than I had anticipated. I put the call out on a Tuesday and it was full by Friday morning.
Yeah.
Which exceeded all expectations that I possibly had about this workshop.
Not that it even has a cap given that it's digital.
It's their first time offering them digitally, and since this is usually a max of 15 people in person, they're trying to see how many, trying to see how it goes like in a workshop. They don't want it just to be a talking head. They want interaction. So there's currently 40 people total signed up between the two workshops, so it's going to be 20 and 20 is how that's going to work. They have offered a digital version of their workshops to anybody who was selected across the country. So if you are super interested in doing digital preservation and you didn't get in, British Columbia is doing it digitally as well. Mind you, their times are going to be British Columbia time, so the sessions would presumably be held late afternoon our time. I do not know if the other people who were selected will be doing theirs for free because CCI is offering this to us for free. But if other topics that you're interested in, they're potentially going to be held across the country online as well. Okay.
So you go through CCI to figure that one out?
Yes, there's usually emails and announcements that come out. I haven't seen anything recently. But once I do, I can forward that information to people because since it's digitally, we can do it. So
very good. Very good. Thanks.
Yes.
Kim, if we're signed up and like, I know for myself, I want to do it in French if
Yes.
it's available, but if anyone else signed up and like is not on this call, do they need to email you and say they want to do it in French or?
I'm going to email them just because I know,
Okay.
I assume you, Robert, as well as Sarah, Julie, and there's a couple other people. I don't want to assume that you want to do it in French, but I'm quite confident that you would want to do it in French. And there's a few other people, I think, who would also be in the same boat as well. So I'm going to send an email out to them personally, and then as well as a general email as well.
Perfect.
So
I just wanted to make sure I didn't need to email you to.
no.
Okay.
I'll still send an email just to say you're
Yep.
down for October dates and this is what's happening.
Perfect.
And as well as I said to other people, we'll get that email as well. So
Perfect. Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, so if that's it, I can let you all go. It's been an hour. I thank you for participating and all your questions. As I said, our next one is September 16th on disaster planning. Hopefully there's not going to be a hurricane during it because that would be ironic, but it should be good. Yes, as I said, if there's any other topics you'd like to see me cover, please let me know and we can set up more webinars. I think these are great. But yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you all for joining and I will send out information afterwards. Bye, everybody.